Hey everybody, this is Paul. Real quick before we get into the podcast, I just want to let you know that I have launched a new newsletter called Local News Industry Pulse, and it is a briefing of news, policy, trends, and more in the local news industry straight to your inbox every Thursday morning. So if you have a minute, go subscribe to Local News Industry Pulse. You can scroll down in your podcast app and click on the link at the very bottom of the show notes right now, or go to localnewsindustrypulse.beehive.com. That's localnewsindustrypulse.beehive.com/subscribe, and you can sign up there. Let's get into today's episode.
Right? Because you don't typically think sales is connecting. You think connecting is a byproduct of sales and not vice versa. At least that's, I think, how most of us have traditionally been taught. Like, the point is get the contract. And I've chosen to shift that. And I want the person, I want the contract, but I want the person more than the contract. If I get the person and not the contract, that's still one.
This is Small Press Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Gewertz. Small Press Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century.
All right. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Johnny Levy. Johnny is the CEO of DataJoe, which develops technology products for business and trade journals. He's also the founder of the Media Data Collaborative, which is a pretty cool thing that he and I have spoken about quite a bit before. He's also an author of a book called The Superpower Quest, and That's also a pretty cool thing that I don't think I added in our notes, but maybe we touched on that too. But anyway, yeah, Johnny, thanks for coming on the podcast, man. I appreciate it.
No, it's an honor, man. I'm pumped to talk with you today.
Awesome. Cool. Well, that was a very broad explanation of what you do, but I'd like to hear your own words, just a quick bio on your life and career and how you got to the space you're in now at DataJoe and MDC.
Really good question. So kind of stumbled into it. I think a lot of people would say that. I kind of stumbled into where I'm at now. I was going to be a comic book artist as a kid, and then I was going to be a creative writer, fantasy novelist. And then I was going to be a poet. I got the poetry, but college was a really defining time for me. And I had a teacher named Antonio Vigil who had crazy impact on my life and kind of drew out from me the idea that language and words could be used to express deep inner truths to move other people. And that's maybe one of the great ground-shaking lessons that I've learned in my entire life. He taught me how to be authentic and vulnerable, and poetry as a place to be that. So that was a huge milestone for me. So then I was going to be a poet. And then I ended up in teaching. After college, I became a teacher at an alternative high school for primarily the gang population in Fort Collins, which most people don't know that Fort Collins has a gang population, but it does.
I was not aware. Really. I even lived there.
Yeah. Fort Collins, Colorado. Yeah. And I wasn't even aware of the whole, 5 years I went to college there, that was there, but it was. And so I ended up spending, doing a lot of street intervention and teaching and things like that. And then ended up not being was going to be a teacher then at that point, and then had a hard time finding a teaching job at a certain point. And so then I entered into the kind of for-profit world as a software trainer, taking my teaching skills and that's where that's kind of, I ended up at DataJoe as a trainer, because we were a software as a service company for specific, really tiny niche business journals who produce a book of lists. And the book of lists, if you're not familiar with it, is, most business journals tap into the business community. So they're the voice and the authority of the business community in a region. And they'll do an annual book of lists where they'll rank the top 25 accounting firms and the top 25 banks and the top 25 commercial real estate agencies, and just show people kind of a yearbook and ranking of businesses by an objective criteria like total revenue or number of employees. And so that's a thing that happens across the United States. And so we had a software platform, the only software platform at the time that semi-automated that process and made it more efficient. And so I became a trainer at the company, and that was, it was incredible. It was cool. It was the first time I had kind of used my gifts in the for-profit space, or as in the world of business. That was the first time I even thought about business. Was years after college, heading into this profession, and because I was so good at training and teaching people how to use the software and understanding the software, it then made sense for sale. We didn't have a formal sales department, so I'd end up leading sales demonstrations and things like that. And that teaching gift came in handy in that scenario because, teachers are not there to close you or pressure you or push you or manipulate you. Teachers are there to teach you and educate and inform. And so that mechanism and style of sales has stayed with me, to the current day, where I still do sales, but I ended up moving into a sales position. And then ultimately, and this is a long story, which I'm not going to get into, but I ended up taking over leadership of the company and becoming the president and then the CEO of the company, DataJoe. And I've been at DataJoe for almost 20 years. That's how long I've been serving media in the realm of data and research, for nearly 20 years now. And so that's kind of the bio. There's a lot of deep stuff that's not there, but
I'm sure we'll get into
the surface, career journey.
That's awesome, man. And you kind of touched on DataJoe pretty well there and your work there, but I know you primarily work with, I think, trade journals. I think you told me once before, but
no,
is that what
it's
it was?
Primarily city. It's city regional magazines.
Oh, I'm thinking of somebody else.
Business journals, newspapers, daily newspapers, and then yes, also trades. I do work with trades, but those are kind of the four.
Okay.
And I'm starting to work with Lions, so local independent online news publishers.
Awesome.
It might be a subset. I don't know.
Yeah, I just had Chris Cruson from Lion on the podcast like a week or two ago. The CEO, the executive director over there. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I have not met him yet. I bet I will, but I have not met him yet.
Can you just speak on, because data, when you say the word data, like to me, because I'm not an expert in the realm at all. It's one of these things, SEO is another one, where it's just like this black box in my head. Like, I understand what data is, you know what I mean? It just seems like it can mean a lot of things. Well, can you just talk on the importance of understanding data for, the audience of this podcast is local media companies, local newspapers, et cetera, Lion type people. Could you just give me your thoughts on that overall, if that's not too broad, if that helps?
Yeah, no, it's great. So because data is it's a complex term, and it means too much to really mean anything, right? And so data can mean anything. And so when I'm talking, and I talk about data from a couple different perspectives. So in my role with DataJoe, data is more synonymous with research and products. So research-driven products, right? And so a product that we do is Book of Lists. Like I said, the Book of Lists would be an example of a research-driven data product, right? So it's public-facing, behind the scenes. We're reaching out, we're polling the community, we're surveying the community, we're compiling all the information, and then we're creating something of value, right, to show. And then we're monetizing that through A, the sales of the data and the product, and B, but more importantly, through advertising sales, right? Like if you flip through a Book of Lists, it's an advertising magnet. There's a lot of ads in there because companies are like, okay, this is where I get to stand and be counted, and this is where I get to celebrate my victory, this is where I get to inform the public about what we're passionate about. And so it's nearly all the products I produce are advertising driven, right? Like that's the why as to why the publisher does it. It's to inform and engage the community and to generate advertising revenue. Those are the primary reasons. And so when I talk about data as DataJoe, it's that kind of narrow conception of data as something to compile and turn into products in order to generate revenue. But I also deal with data, like the example, the Media Data Collaborative, which we'll get into later, in kind of these different circles that expand out from there, right? And so data is also everything that a media organization knows about their audience, right? Like that's data, right? Which web pages did they visit? What newsletters are they subscribed to? What events did they come to? What all services are they using from us? And then what do we know about them, even using third-party overlays, right? Like, because that is kind of the key and probably a part of the bright future of media publishing is they have this, that people voluntarily come to them and tell them things about themselves through the behaviors and interactions that they don't tell anybody else, right?
It's
And
true.
so that's this amazing opportunity that's maybe tough to monetize, right? We're still trying to figure out how to monetize that. Some people are doing it extremely well. Some people are like, what is that? You know? So,
Right.
but I'd say that's the broader sense. And I'm very excited about that broader sense of data, in terms of, audience and what that is. You could even say that your content, your news content is data in a sense, right? And again, the question is, how well can it become structured? But if you have a taxonomy for your articles and your content, that's a function of data, right? Like it's metadata. So in other words, I'd say those are probably the circles that are, and the first two really are probably the circles that are relevant to our conversation. Although you could blow it out even further if you wanted to, right?
Right. That's interesting how you said it, and I hadn't really thought about it that way before. How local publishers in particular have people coming to them with their personal data or whatever, and like telling them stories, telling them what they're thinking. And the question is how to monetize that. That's almost like a microcosm of what I found on this podcast of the local news industry at large. Is like, you hear the narrative, and I've said this a million times on the podcast, of local news is dead and like local publishing is dying and everything. And I don't think it's true. It's like, if you look at like the Google search trends for like local information, it's remained exactly constant forever for the last 30 years over this and everything. The question is, how do you monetize that in the digital age? And data's probably big, kind of plays a key in there, I would imagine.
It is. It's the enchilada in a lot of ways, but it is. My friend Guy Tasaka, who I think you've interviewed.
Yeah,
I know you've interviewed before because he introduced me to you.
I love Guy. Yeah, I had him on. He's coming on again, actually. Spoiler alert on the podcast for a different thing. But anyway, yeah.
He talks about data as the crude oil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's the crude oil that has to be refined in order to, create this multi-billion dollar industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're crude oil, no one can do anything with it.
Right.
You got to refine it. It's got to go through a process, become something of value. But when it becomes something of value, it's of incredible value. But it's a longer game.
It's interesting. I listened because I don't have time to read books with my toddlers anymore, but I do audiobooks. I listened to the autobiography on John Rockefeller, and he was like crazy rich from his oil industry when it was just for like lanterns. That's what the main use case. And then like one of their byproducts they had from their oil was this thing called, from their kerosene, one of the byproducts was this thing called gasoline, and nobody had any use for it. And then like Henry Ford came along, and like put the Model T out, and he's like, oh, and that's like, I think Rockefeller was like in his 60s or something when he made most of his money because it just happened like that. So it's like, wow, that's just what that reminds me of, like the crude oil kind of metaphor or whatever,
Yeah.
It's just got to uncover that Model T. That's the goal.
It's so true. And they will. So, I mean, those who persist will, I believe.
Yes, I totally agree. All right. So we've spoken about this before, and just networking in general. And I think you've called yourself, or you've talked about being a super connector in the local media space and the data space and everything. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, what that means to you.
Yeah. This is a great tie back to my book. So I wrote a book. The book's called The Superpower Quest. This is it right here.
Nice.
And one of the most incredible and joyful experiences of my life was actually getting to write a book and getting a book in my hand. But the book is really a reflection of my life message, or one of the deep lessons that I've learned in life that I wish to share with the world. And so it has to do with personality assessment, right? Like I before I wrote the book was just over the moon about personality assessments like the Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, Unique Ability is another one by Dan Sullivan. That's a self-discovery process. I'm probably missing a couple, the big five. There are just all these different ways to kind of categorize human personality that everyone knows tend to hold true, right? Like they tend to hold true. There are certain characteristics in people that are in common amongst large groups of people that other groups of people don't have, right? So, for example, the connector. I am and I've always been a connector. Connectors are curious. Connectors are very open. Connectors invite conversation. Connectors make people feel comfortable. Connectors make friends very quickly, right? Like we're kind of the glue, that attaches different aspects of society together or aspects of community together, right? Because people know each other through us, through connectors, because we connectors take the time to know people, right? To know and understand people. We've got a lot of relational and emotional intelligence. So, when I was a kid, growing up in Park Hill in Denver, which was, kind of at that time, a pretty tough neighborhood, plenty of gang activity and, I was bullied. I had a pretty tough childhood. And I just remember thinking as a child, like, man, I just don't have the the currency of my neighborhood is toughness, dominance, violence, right? Like those were, drive. Those were the characteristics that were rewarded, let's say, in my world. And I was really low on a lot of those characteristics. I was sensitive and kind of awkward and scared and, empathetic, which that's not a good thing to be in a tough environment like that. And cared a lot about what people thought about me and was very insecure with that, and so all that stuff, I grew up with a sense that something was wrong with me and that I was just missing something that a man should have, right? That like you're not gonna watch. I mean, I'm growing up playing video games and watching Rambo and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm just not that. I wish I could be that. And it took a journey to begin to come to terms with the fact that I just had a different design, not a worse design, right? There were these moments, and one of these moments happened the first time there was this personality assessment, really simple. It's like the DISC assessment. So it's a four-tiered personality assessment. It was called Lion, Otter, Beaver, Golden Retriever. Now, I thought men should all be lions.
Right.
Type A, dominant, aggressive. And I tested as an otter, playful, inspirational, relational, life of the party, gregarious, right? Like I tested as an otter. And that was the beginning for me of being able to say, well, maybe not that something's wrong with me. Maybe I'm just different. Right. And so that was basically the thrust of the Superpower Quest book, was basically putting my own spin on, let's use the hero's journey. Let's use the superhero trope that I am so in love with. I grew up loving comic books with my dad, and then let's take the things that I love about these different personality assessments and let's create a self-discovery process that is the hero's journey, to discovering and unlocking the potential that's inside of you, but also wrestling with your shadow, right? Like wrestling with or learning to embrace and steward your weakness, right? Like, gosh, man, that right there, dude. Like, if I could teach somebody to learn to be gentle with their weakness, so much joy and freedom that comes from that, in addition to embracing and pressing into your strength and learning to come to terms with your particular design, not as something to be wrestled with and defeated, but as something to be embraced and understood and leveraged. So anyway, that's so connector is one of the 6 hero types in my book. There's the connector, the nurturer, the dreamer, the achiever, and the organizer and the leader, right? And so I am a connector dreamer. I have a little personality assessment people can take, and they usually will test very high on 2, and then medium on 2, and then low on 2. And the 2 that you're low on is more your kryptonite. 2 in the middle are your supporting, and then your top 2 are your dominant hero types. So I'm a connector dreamer, which means I'm relational, gregarious. You and I talked the first time. We became friends the first time we talked, right?
Yeah.
Because we're both that kind of people. Like, I'm open. I love people. I want to know people. I authentically enjoyed spending time with you, and I'm enjoying spending time with you now. I make friends very easily because I enjoy people, and I'm authentic with people.
Today's episode is sponsored by LocalPod.co. LocalPod offers podcast production and consulting for local news organizations, and only local news organizations. LocalPod creates weekly news podcasts based off of the top stories from your publication. You provide the script, we handle the rest. We narrate your news, edit it, produce it with a custom intro and outro with music, and distribute the podcast to all available podcast apps. Your listeners will see your branding and hear your content in their podcast feed, just like wherever you're listening to right now. Podcasts are one of the most engaging digital formats, which is why we can also help you monetize your podcast as well. We offer custom ad reads for your podcast, and we can also set up subscriptions so that you can monetize your audience directly. Have you thought of launching a podcast but want to control it in-house? We can help you with that too. LocalPod offers podcast coaching. We offer in-depth one-on-one coaching calls, along with the actionable steps you need to launch a successful revenue-generating podcast of your own. To find out more, visit localpod.co, that's localpod.co, or just click on the link in the episode show notes in your podcast app. All right, back to the show.
Yeah, and man, that's so important just in life and business and everything. Because I mean, this podcast is about the local media space, and I caught myself thinking like, well, what's this have to do with that? But I mean, it has everything to do with it. I just had a guy on the podcast yesterday. It hasn't come out yet or anything, and he was talking about he came up on the business side of a bunch of different newspapers and stuff like that. He's kind of like a consultant now, and he was saying the best salesperson he ever knew, like at a newspaper. She was like exactly what you were saying, a super connector. She knew every business in town, how they worked, like, oh, this restaurant has this back room over here, maybe, and these people have to want this like little conference to put on. Let's connect them and boost their, anyway, it's all about that. It all helps, and also the importance of just the community part of, local news and everything. So I think that's super important, and couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah. So that's what I am. When I go to the store, when I, go to a business meeting, when I go to church, what I am is a connector, right? And so it just makes sense then that that's what I would do in my job within media, is to become a connector, or to put that gift to work for the people that I'm advocating for within the media space. And so it's only been the last probably 2 years that I've really begun to press into that gifting, right? Because you don't typically think sales is connecting. You think connecting is a byproduct of sales and not vice versa. At least that's, I think, how most of us have traditionally been taught. Like, the point is get the contract. And I've chosen to shift that. And I want the person, I want the contract, but I want the person,
right,
more than the contract. If I get the person and not the contract, I still won, right? That's how I feel. That's how I live. That's how I sell. And so that relational way of doing things, my team, basically, we kind of reformed a couple years ago, and because I had my hands in a lot of things that I shouldn't have been doing, and my team set me free it took about a year, set me free from the internal stuff that I was doing that was within my kryptonite, right? Like, I'm not an organizer, I'm not an achiever, like I'm not a tenacity guy that's just sit me down and I'm just gonna crank it out. I'm not that guy, and I'm not the planning guy who's like, let's build a system, and you know what I mean, and then let's hold people accountable to it. Like, I'm not that guy at all. I need to be head up in the clouds, hanging out with people, having big ideas, inspiring people, and closing deals, right? Like, that comes from that. But I wasn't. I was spending a minority of my time doing that because I was stuck with all these things that I was doing, and they got me out, and they just kind of set me free. So grateful for my team, because I have an integrator / organizer named Caleb, Caleb Anthony. I couldn't do this without him. He's my right-hand man. And he's for me. He sees my gift, I see his gift, and we work incredibly well together, right? So he set me free. And so part of that has been now not only connecting with publishers and ad directors and things like that who are kind of my prospects, but also spending time connecting with other vendors who are excellent at what they do in an effort to proliferate excellence into the media space, right? Because when a publisher comes to me and trusts me and says, hey, Johnny, I know you're my data guy, but can you tell me who should I use for my, we're thinking about changing CMS. Who should I use for that? Or we're thinking about, we need an ad server. People ask me stuff like that. And at this point, I have cultivated my go-to people. that are people of integrity, people that have a similar ethos to what I have. There's a book called The Go-Giver. If you haven't read it, it's a John David Mann and Bob Berg, incredible book about the art of generosity and its application to business that ties business and generosity. It basically builds the case that generosity is good business. I think it's important. It's a beautiful book. So I find people who are go-givers, find people who are excellent and a beast at what they do. And then I connect those people with publishers who are innovators and people of integrity and, are good at what they do. And then I've just made it a hobby to put those people together. And a lot of times they do business, right? Because this person authentically has a need. This person authentically can supply that need. And it's not transactional, it's relational, because there's the integrity and the bond that gets created through friendship. And they do business together, And so that, I've done as much business for other people, if not more, this last year than for myself in my company. And I feel good about that. And so that kind of morphed into this idea called the Media Data Collaborative, which is a group that meets monthly. It's all the people that I've come across in 20 years, or, a lot of the people. I'm thinking of new people to add every day or whatever, but it's people from my past who resonated with me as people with a similar ethos of integrity and generosity, people who are a beast at some aspect of media services, either as a media publisher or as a media provider. They're just a beast at what they do. They're experienced. They know what they're doing. They're excellent. And it usually has something to do with the realm of data in the more broad sense, right? I told you two senses in the beginning. In the broader sense, these are people that help organizations monetize their data or use their data to create heightened engagement and heightened user experience and heightened blessing and benefit for the community, which is the flip side of the coin of revenue, right? It's like creating value, making money, two sides of the same coin. And so publishers and providers coming together with a desire to create a rising tide for all of media and willing to wrestle with the problems that are, I think, at the forefront of innovation, which is how do we leverage our greatest asset, if I'm a publisher, which is my data, which is what I know about this community and the people in this community and how they interact with me, and what are the opportunities that I have to ask them things I've never asked them before that they would tell me if I asked them, right? Like all that beautiful, adventurous frontier thinking is what happens within that every month.
Man, that's awesome. You got to give us a little peek behind the curtain, though. Like what, you don't have to name names, but talk about some of the people in there or some of the stuff being talked about, because I'm interesting. Maybe just like an example or two from the last call or something like that. Yeah.
All right. Well, so first I'll talk about a couple people. So one of them is Kenny Katzkorau.
Oh yeah, we talked about him before.
Yeah.
I haven't connected with him yet, but yeah, I remember you bringing him up. Yeah.
I mean, he's just an amazing human, and what he's doing in media is remarkable, right? So he owns an ad serving company, a very specialized and effective, specifically for media, ad serving company that has a great ethos, a great culture, and a great vision. But he also acquired a publication, a local, hyperlocal publication called Red Bank Green, and has basically taken his innovation and vision and married the two together, and is doing these amazing things with this publication as his sandbox for his incredible ideas. And so he's become a media publisher. And so he now can speak to both sides, right? The technology side and where media is going, and actual practical application of those things to create real forward progress and revenue, which he does all the time. Right. So imagine a perspective like that in the call. Like he's consistently contributing, so that's, and I'm going to leave some people out. I'm just going to give you a couple people that come to mind, not for any particular reason, except for maybe, I've had more conversations with them, or they've talked to me more recently. David LaFontaine, who is this incredible, journalistic UX designer. So he's landed in UX design, but he's really a mystery problem solver. So he did this audit for a publisher friend of a friend of mine, and just went in and was like, let me look at all your metrics, let me look at all your data, everything you're collecting, and I'm going to tell you the story. And he told them the story, and the story was full of like things that they had no idea. Their highest performing article of all time, they had no idea, and they didn't even understand why until they dug into it. And they were like, and so they got this incredible concrete call to action, like create more content like this because people exponentially love it more than your other stuff due to the data, right? He tells, David LaFontaine tells data stories. This guy is freaking amazing. You know what I mean? And then we got Greg Kriebel, who's, big on like understanding CDP. And this is maybe getting into topical. So we've been talking about customer data platforms, which I know sounds like gibberish. I start using jargon like this. Folks are like, yeah, I've heard that before. I don't know what it is. I barely know, right? Like, I barely know. Like, I've never used it. Like, I understand in principle, CDP is this supercharged form of technology that sits underneath all of your different channels and begins compiling and synthesizing all the data you're collecting. People are who's going where, what they're doing, what their tendencies are, when they buy, all this kind of stuff, so that you now have this rich, what they call a golden record, right? Like, so they might be interacting with you from all these different places, but you need a way to bring them all into one view, right? One profile where you can see everything that's going on. And then you can learn the entire story behind this person, and then you can market to them accordingly, right? Like, so it's expensive. It's high tech. It's expensive. It's cutting edge. It's probably not the right thing for most small to mid-sized publishers, but some of the larger publishers absolutely need to be investing in it. But but even that conclusion I just came to, maybe not the right thing for small to mid-sized publishers, came through wrestling through this issue in one of the media data collaborative sessions and saying, all right, come on, what should we be telling publishers about CDP? Do we need to be like trumpeting it from the mountaintop? Y'all need to have a CDP or not? And it turns out the things you're trying to accomplish through CDP, you can accomplish through other more familiar and more accessible technologies for the time being, right? So you can use Salesforce, you can use SurveyMonkey, you can actually cobble together a solution for a much lower cost, and that's going to probably do like of the 10 things that CDP makes possible, maybe there are 4 that really, really get you the bang for your buck right now, right at the stage that you're in. So cobble together a solution and get those 4 things, because until you learn to monetize one, why do you need 10? Right?
Right.
So that's the recommendation now. The recommendation is, okay, first let's talk about what you're actually willing to pursue a path towards monetization on. And then let's cobble together the right, MVP, right? Minimum viable product with the lowest possible cost to get you some traction on actually making money in this new way. And then let's upgrade from there to the point where maybe you'll end up somewhere on the CDP scale, but maybe not. So anyway, Greg Kriebel was a great contributor to that conversation. And I've got a couple, like Robbie Haas is another guy, just these incredible minds when it comes to this complex technology. And I'm trying to wrangle them together and then help them explain it to me like an 8th grader, right? Because I'm not a tech guy. You know what I mean? Like, yep. I'm a gatherer of people and a facilitator of story, but I'm not the smartest guy in the room, right? Like, by far. So if I feel it's my job if you can get me to understand it, then I can probably get other laymen to understand it, right? That's kind of the goal, is bringing these complex topics. So that's an example of one of the things we've wrestled through. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. And I think you're hard on yourself when you say you're not the smartest guy in the room. I think like there's different. I think everybody has their own genius. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of dumb. Yeah. Like, this guy's really good at coding and stuff, so he's really smart. That's just a broader societal thing. I don't entirely subscribe to.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, you're doing. I mean, you're using your genius or your superpowers to push it forward. That's awesome. So we hadn't talked about this when we spoke or anything, but I think after our last call, I don't know if I got an email from you or it was on LinkedIn or something, but something from your People of Media series. I was wondering if you could talk about that, because that's really cool. I didn't even know you were doing it until I kind of stumbled across it. Yeah. Speak about that a little bit.
Oh, it's so fun. It's so fun. So it's another one of the consequences of me being set free to live inside of my gifting, right? Mm-hmm. So like now I can confidently say I'm a connector, and what do? Primarily I connect. I connect with people, and then I connect people with people. Those are the two steps of it, right? And so because I'm spending so much time, most of my workday is spent on Zoom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Zoom or maybe phone calls, but mostly Zoom with amazing people. And a lot of those people are amazing people within media, whether they're providers or they're publishers. Get a front row seat because I take the time to listen, because taking the time to listen is part of what I have actually been asked to go out into the world and do. Kind of like you, right? Like that's a big part of my job, a big part of my life. And so the people of media evolved out of that. Like I'm having these conversations and I invariably get off the conversation and I think that was mind blowing and I didn't record it.
Right.
Right. Like, and so man, how good could this be for the world to start taking some of these things that are happening behind closed doors? Because like you, I'm very curious. I'm a question asker. And I often, and it, right, Paul? Like, it when you ask the right series of questions
Mm-hmm.
that gets to this gold nugget that this person has hiding inside of them that they maybe didn't even know they had,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're doing something special. They're doing something unprecedented, or there's an unprecedented character quality that they're showing forth in the way that they do business that they maybe never named, right? And so I just started being like, you know what? I'm going to start just inviting these people that I see the glimmer of greatness in, come sit with me for an hour and let me unpack that for the world, right? Let unpack what they're doing, their gift, their superpower, what their publication or their media property is doing that's special, that can shed light on the blueprint for others that are in the same game, the same community, trying to figure this stuff out. And like, let's see if we can raise each other up. So that's what people in media is. It's purely my discretion. It's who I pick to go and interview and unpack their story. And it usually has, it's always amazing people that are remarkable to me in some way. It's always people that, it's generally people, it's always people who are facing media in some way, whether as a provider or as a media publisher. And then generally it makes its way to data in some way, right? Like not always though, but generally it makes its way to data because it's under the DataJoe banner and the Media Data Collaborative banner, and then people of media. And, those people that are a part of the Media Data Collaborative are generally also people that I'm tapping to be a part of this experiment, which has been successful purely in the sense that I get to cover great stories and I get to draw closer to people that I respect and get like real time with them. And I think for them, hearing that the experience is cathartic in a way, right? Like, and also it's affirming in a way because they're hearing someone else begin to put a name to the greatness that is in them that maybe they haven't given themselves permission to name or even think about as greatness, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's my passion project in a lot of ways.
I love it, man. It's very similar to what I'm kind of trying to do with this podcast too. I feel the same way in a lot of ways. It's so great. And, just putting these, like you hit the nail on the head, like with a good podcast episode or whatever it may be, when you can draw something out of somebody they didn't know was in there and like amazing insight. You don't know what things are going to lead to. So that's kind of the really fun part about it.
Yeah.
Great stuff. I might have to ask you off air for some intros for some of those people that come on the podcast too. We're all in the same game
for
here.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I've been watching what you're doing and I'm thinking, okay, this guy's, we're partners in this, right? Because if what we're both trying to do is uplift media through exposing media to amazing people and amazing ideas, well, there's really no difference.
Yeah.
It's we're going to do it differently because we're different people.
Cool, man. Well, we've run over a little bit, which is fine, but I do need to hop off in just a few minutes here. And I wouldn't mind doing this again. I think we could do multiple episodes. But where can people find you? Where would you point to? What do you want me to link to in the show notes? And anything else you'd like to promote that we haven't already talked about?
Yeah, the biggest thing to link to would be the newsletter that we have that goes out. It's called Media Plus Data Plus Revenue. So Media Data Revenue. And that is at datajoe.substack.com. And that's where you're going to find recordings of our Media Data Collaborative sessions. Those all get posted there. And that's also where you'll find People of Media. Those are both tabs at the top. And so the people I've interviewed for People of Media has its own section on the site. And and connect with me on LinkedIn. I mean, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn every single day.
Me too.
I'd say that I'm a pretty advanced user of LinkedIn, and I love the platform and how it works. And so, find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Johnny Levy, I think is what it is. I don't know. I probably got that wrong.
I'll link to it. It's
you can find me.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. Yeah. I'll link to that.
Like me.
I'll link to all that stuff. It's funny. You're on LinkedIn a lot. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I don't think we've ever interacted on there besides like connecting or whatever. It's just been through these calls and everything. Okay, man. Well, thank you so much. And we'll probably have to do this again. And thanks for coming on. I appreciate it, man.
I loved it, man. I love spending time with you, Paul. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.